everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am Camelia. Welcome to a new sewing review. Today I would like to share with you the latest pattern from Designer Stitch, the Yvette dress. Actually it's already out for a week or something, but I really wanted to make this review combined with tutorial for the teardrops here in the front, because while they are not difficult to make, there are a few small details that you can take into account and to make your sewing a little bit easier, because this part here is of course the most, I don't know, the focus on this garment. So if you need help for that, you can go to take a look in the timestamps of this video and you can skip directly to the tutorial. Maybe you would like to hear me talking a little bit about the details of the new Yvette dress from Designer Stitch. So first of all, this is the one that I made. Actually it was a pre-test, this dress, and it's a dress, it's the big one, the longer skirt. And this is the top actually that I made during the tutorial. So I'm going to, in the tutorial that you are going to see, I'm working actually on this shirt. So the Yvette dress is a pattern made for jersey knits, for really soft and drapey jersey knits. For example, like this one here, something like this. So this is a typical 95% viscose and 5% elastane. It's very drapey and very soft. I think this one will make also a very nice Yvette. If you want to see it, how it's draping. So it's made for really soft jersey knits. It comes with a bunch of options. Of course it has the typical or the cup sizing, what in Designer Stitch patterns you mostly find, the cup sizing, and that means that you have a bust dart here, and that is actually the only thing that I had to change, that, and that is a typical change for me in the Designer Stitch patterns for the jersey knits. In their block I always need to raise only the point of my dart a little bit, and that's why that is also what I did in this pattern. So it's made for jersey knits. It comes with cup sizing, very important. It has 3 skirt lengths, so the dress option, and you get different pieces for the dress, for the bodice, for the dress, and for the top. For the dress is a shorter piece, of course, that is getting also waist darts, and you have other pieces for the top that are of course longer. I think you can also use, if you print and make only the top, later you can cut it and then just put the darts in the waist to fit the skirt. I was thinking that's also possible. I made my dress because at the time of the testing it had only the long sleeves, but it comes with 5 different sleeve lengths, and yes, I'm reading from the website on my tablet. It has 5 sleeve lengths. It has of course a sleeveless option, and then you can bind it, the sleeve opening, the armhole. It has a cap sleeve length, elbow length, 3/4 and a full length. And I must say that my dress and also my top, they are both made with the longest length. As I said, it has a top and a dress length, and it has also of course a piece for a self-tie belt. I didn't have enough fabric to make a belt for this one, so I just wear with a normal belt. And of course the main interest of this fabric, of this design, are the 3 teardrops here, and that is getting the neckline is getting finished with the binding. Actually it's the same process as you'll do on the teardrops, you'll use also for the neck binding. While the pattern itself is really not difficult, of course it's a jersey pattern, it's nothing difficult about it. The only difficult part is, these details here, the 3 drops, the 3 openings, and the neck binding do require a little bit more of attention, and I don't know, it's very important to sew. The bindings of the openings are all made with a single layer of binding, so the piece is So let's say that this is the binding that you are cutting. You are not going to fold it and then attach it on the openings. You are just using it with a single fold, with a single layer, and that's getting stitched with a 6mm seam allowance, and then everything is turned into the back and stitched in the ditch or top stitched. You see in my tutorial that I used both, and I'm showing both methods with top stitching and stitching in the ditch. If you can see, I don't know if you can see on some parts, my stitching in the ditch was not really perfect, but I'm stitching a little bit of strange, I don't know how I'm sitting at my sewing machine with a video cam. And I also used a very light thread in order to be able to see something. In the tutorial I'm showing how to, I'm not going over the complete sewing of this pattern because it's really easy. I mean, if you have the holes done, you can stitch, of course there are the darts. The darts I sew them before I sew the side seams, but after the holes I'm sewing the shoulder seams. I'm also inserting some clear elastic. I'm going to put a link to the tutorial how I'm doing that. Then I'm binding the neckline, sew the darts and the side seams, and then sew the sleeve seam and inserting the sleeves in the round. I always do that. I like to insert my sleeves in the round. Doesn't matter what kind of garment I sew, woven or knit. Of course, if it's a drop shoulder or something like that, I'm going to sew them flat. What I show in this tutorial, I also, because when I was cutting this top, I was thinking what are other possibilities to sew this in an easier way. So I'm showing in the tutorial how to sew this to make the bindings with a sewing machine. So applying the first run of the binding on the bodies. I'm showing it first with the sewing machine and also with the serger. The thing is that sewing jersey fabrics with the sewing machine requires a little bit of extra care. So first of all, I am always putting the presser foot pressure a little bit higher, and I'm showing you in the tutorial lower, so that the presser foot is not pressing so much on the fabric. So I'm showing you in the tutorial, I think I put it 3 steps lighter. So the presser foot pressure. Also I'm lengthening the stitch length. I'm sewing with a straight stitch, not a stretch stitch, but with a straight one, with a normal straight stitch. I'm only lengthening that to 3 instead of a 2.5, because you see when you are sewing with your sewing machine knit fabric, of course the fabric is going to get a little bit stretched, and then when it's coming back the stitches are going to be even smaller than what you are using. So a 3 length is a good length to use with stretchy fabrics or with this kind of jersey. And so the presser foot pressure and the stitch length is a little bit longer. What I find nice with, and of course it's really important to keep the 6mm seam allowance. I'm still saying that 100 times in my tutorial, but I tried to put the first run of the binding with the serger, and the nice thing is that I think my smallest width of the serged seam is 6mm. I used 2 needles, but you can do that also by using only 3 needles. So not 3 needles, 3 threads. So 1 needle and the upper looper and the lower looper. But I used 2 needles, so 4 threads, because I had that in my serger. And the nice thing is that having that the smallest width stitch on the serger is 6mm, so that's giving me a really perfect edge to bind later. And of course the serger is going to transport the fabric much nicer than my sewing machine. And I tried that, and to be honest, I really like better the ones that are made with the serger. These ones are made with the sewing machine. They are looking okay. And in this case, this one is made with the sewing machine, and these two are made with the serger. And you see the difference also in the tutorial. I think is really good. You can see it really good. Again, everything here in this tree I stitched in the ditch, and you see in the tutorial I used for two of them, I think the stitch in the ditch foot, and for one I just follow a mark on my presser foot, and then I can keep an eye on that one, and I can stitch in the seam. But for the neckline I just top stitched because I have a printed fabric. I used thread that is pretty much disappearing in the print, and of course top stitching is much easier. Something that you really need to keep in mind when you are making this, after you are turning the binding and you are top stitching or stitching the ditch, whatever, is really important. If you want to have the keyholes laying flat on your body like this, as you can see everything is lying really flat, it's really important to trim the rest of the binding here on the inside. You see in the tutorial I'm showing that, because only like that these holes are going to sit flat, and of course give a lot of steam. Everything is going to get nice in shape. Yeah, so this is it. It's only a matter of care and a little bit of attention on the seam allowance, because the seam allowance width that you are going to use is also going to give you, of course, the width of the keyholes here of the binding. And you can imagine that if you are using a 1 centimeter seam allowance, you have a really big chance that it's not going to sit flat. The smaller width, the better you have nicer results here in the front. For the rest, the top I used the cover stitch machine for the hems, and for this one also. This one I made already time ago as a pretest, as I said. So this is it. This is the Yvette dress. I hope you'll enjoy the tutorial. If you have any questions, put them here in the description, and I hope you'll enjoy sewing this beautiful pattern from Designer Stitch. I have my pieces all cut, and that includes, of course, the front. You have it originally, if it's cut on the, if you don't make the front piece pattern in one piece, you cut it on the fold, of course. And the big teardrop here is going to be closed, but you have to snip it exactly in the middle with your scissor, and then it's going to be open in order to be sewn. So this is the front, of course. I have here the darts, which are marked. I hope you can see. I used my tracing wheel and tracing paper to mark the darts. Again, as I said, I am making the top version only because it's just easier to work here in the video with it. I have here the back, which is cut, of course, also on the fold. If you really want to have this one really fitted and really nice on the at the center, lower center back, of course you can cut it with a seam on the center back, and then you have the possibility to make it really nice at the back. I did make a sway back adjustment, but I did still cut this on the fold. And I'm going to attach some clear elastic here in the shoulder seam. And the next pieces, of course, are the sleeves. Here is the longest sleeve length, and I'm going to put these ones in the round, as I mostly do with my with everything that I'm sewing that has sleeves, of course. And for the bindings, I just have some strips of the jersey that I'm using, and they don't have a particular length, but I'm going to use them for the keyholes, and also one for the neck band. It's very important when you are making the keyholes on the front that you have enough length in the binding, because you don't want to get at the end of your keyhole and realize that you don't have enough binding. So I'm working with a really long piece, and then I can, when I'm at the end, let's say, I can trim it, and that makes it really easy, actually. Much easier than to work, imagine, with a piece that is just enough long, you have nothing to grab. So these are the pieces, and I'm going to start sewing, but as I said, I'm going to show you two ways to make the keyholes. and I a few days ago, when I was preparing for this, I made a test to see what is going to work the best or the easiest way, let's say. So per instructions you have, you are instructed to sew, of course, the binding, single layer of binding, right sides together, and sew with a 6mm seam allowance. I tried one with the sewing machine and one with the serger. I don't know if I can zoom a little bit in, maybe you can see. I'm going to move this. This one is here made with a serger, and this one is a sewing machine. I must say that with the serger it was really very easy with no effort at all, while with the sewing machine I did have to take a little bit of care on, because it's very important to have the seam distance or the seam allowance that you are using when you are stitching the binding must be 6mm, because that is the binding is wrapping over that seam allowance, and that is going to give you the really nice teardrop. If you are very wonky with your seam allowance when you are wrapping, of course your keyhole is going to be a mess. Having the serger that you can really run this against the knife, or even put the knife off and follow a marking on your serger. And of course the serger is feeding the jersey stuff, the really soft jersey, much nicer than the sewing machine. I think if you have a serger you can give that a try. I'm going to show you in a minute. On the sewing machine I'm going to talk a little bit about the settings that you should have to make sewing jersey fabric, or at least at this point to make really successful and to be sure that you have a really neat keyhole. So first I'm going to show you how to put the binding with the sewing machine. But I want to talk a little bit about the settings on the sewing machine that you want to look at before you are starting to sew. I have here my standard straight stitch with a length of 2.5, and nothing is adjusted yet. What I really want to do in order to sew this really soft jersey, first of all I want to put the presser foot pressure, and probably on your machine you have a knob that you need to turn, or like on this one a setting on a screen or whatever. So the presser foot pressure on mine is 6.5, and I know that with a fabric like this I want to have it at least 3 points lower, so that the presser foot is giving a little bit of space and is not going to press so much against the fabric to pull it. So the presser foot pressure should be a little bit lighter. And then the stitch length, because this is a stretchy fabric and it's going to stretch while sewing, I am going to put it to a 3. And you'll see that you need to put just a little bit of tension on the fabric in order to make that straight stitching, to give it a little bit of a stretch. So putting my straight stitch a little bit higher, I'm not going to use a straight stitch, I'm not a stretch stitch, yes, that's correct. I'm not going to use that, and I'm also not going to use any of those I don't know, zigzags or stuff like that. It's really not necessary, just a straight stitch with a length of 3, a little bit lower pressure on the presser foot, and I'm ready to go. On this machine, of course, I have the great opportunity to use the differential feed, and if you have a puff and you have that option, please do it. What you can also use when sewing stretchy fabrics with your normal sewing machine and you find that they are not fitting really nicely, you can also use a presser foot like this. And this is a double transport presser foot. Mine is really old, but I used to have it on my brother machine where I did not have the IDT, the double transport standard on my machine. But this one is a really useful foot to use when sewing stretchy fabrics, because it's helping with feeding both layers of the fabric at the same time. So you might want to consider this if you are sewing a lot of stretchy fabrics with your sewing machine. So now I have my settings done and I'm ready to start sewing. Of course, you are free to start first showing your darts or whatever. But I think making the keyholes is going to be, you know, you have them out of the way. I have here the front piece, and I have, as I said, a really long piece of the binding. And a really long piece of the binding, and to be sure that you're able to see, I'm going to use a really light thread. I have the binding and I'm going to put it right sides together. Just going to start here at the top. Again, I have enough binding, I can let a really big piece of it hanging out. And I'm just going to, it's very important to find a marking on your presser foot, something to help you guide to have that 6mm seam allowance exactly correct the whole time. Maybe you want to move your needle to the right or to the left or whatever, what works for you. I have even one of those, let's see, this one. This presser foot has from here to here 6mm, so I can also use it, but this one has only one hole, so I can use it only with a straight stitch, or with a straight stitch with the needle in the center position. But I'm going to try to use with this one, and on this one I have a marking here that I'm going to follow with my fabric. You really should not go more than 6-7mm, I don't know, something like that, because otherwise your keyhole is really not going to lay flat. So I have it here. Again, I have a really quite strange position here because of the you don't need to go fast here, you don't need to stretch anything, just go around one on one. And if you find that your presser foot is still putting too much pressure, you can put it even a little bit lower. So I'm going to give this a little bit, don't pull it, just work here next to the presser foot, because you don't need to match this all the way around. You really need to work here in front of the needle, let's say. I really hope you can see this. So here I'm at the most rounded part of the teardrop. So again, I am working exactly in front of the needle. I'm not going too much in front of the presser foot. I'm really not going too much around. Again, adjust. And again, adjust. And I'm just going to come now to the end. Get now to the straighter part. Very important, of course, after doing this is pressing, pressing, pressing. And also before you get to the next step, press, press, press. Okay. And I'm done. Let's see what I have now. This is what I have now. Let me put the focus here. You can see here the really light green stitching line right here. And this one is going to get now, so you don't need to trim anything. If you did your best to follow the 6mm, you don't need to trim anything, because the band is now going to go up, wrap over the seam allowance, and go down here. And then you'll have your beautiful binding. What is important now is to press this, and I'm going to show you in a minute how I'm doing that, and then stitch in the ditch, or of course you can also top stitch this, but I think the most beautiful results you will have if you are going to stitch in the ditch. And as you can see, there is enough stretch even if I used a straight stitch and not a stretch one. And you can also see that my stitches, even if they are on a 3, they are quite small. That's why it's important to use a little bit longer stitch to retain a little bit of the stretchiness in the final seam. Next, I'm going to show you how to make this with one of the teardrops with the serger, and then we are going to press and we are going to take a look how to finish this. So I have here my serger, and it's really, I have the threads what I used for my previous project, blue and beige, so I'm just going to keep those for the moment. And I have here back my front, and I will have to cut a piece of this jersey, of the band, just to, okay, let's see, this is long enough. So I think this is really easy. What you can do on your serger, you can, I have my differential feed on neutral. You could do this also with a 3 threads overlock. You don't need to have 2 needles. You can really use only 1, but I have 2, so I'm going to use that. I'm going to engage my knife, but if you want to be really sure, you can put it off and then just sew against that blade and use that as a, how should I say, as a guide, but I'm just going to let it on. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to put my stitch length on 3. So I have here my piece. Let me find the other hole, and I'm just going to serge this together again. A piece of the binding, right sides together, and just going to start on the extra length of that binding. Let's see if I can put this one a little bit closer, and I'm just going to serge. I have here under, I have my top. Do I have enough? I hope so. And of course, being a serger, and you know, a serger knows its stuff with knits, is really easy to serge this. Again, working your way just in front of the presser foot and not so much the rest of the length. Let's see. Of course, this stitching is going to be invisible. That's why I am doing it with this thread. I hope you can see. And you know, if I trim just a smidge, like 1 millimeter, it's really not a big deal. But I'm trying not to. If I see that I'm trimming something, that means that I am too far. I think I'm going to make the big one also with the serger, just because it's so easy. And then I'm going to show you how I press this. Don't stress about the millimeter that I'm cutting out, because that one is going to be, you know, it's not going to be visible. So this is how it's looking serged now, and this is going to be covered, and it's going to, the serging of course is giving also a really sturdier edge here to wrap over. So I think it's a really nice result. I'm going to make the big one the same, and I'm going to show you how to press this, and then to make the final stitching to make the teardrops. So I have the 3 teardrops here sewn. 2 are with the serger and 1 is with the sewing machine. And let's start with the sewing machine one. I have here my seam. I can give it a little bit of press and a bit of steam. And what I want to do now It's really nice if you have a pressing hand, but you can also do it on your flat table, but on a little bit of a higher surface it's going to work a little bit better, or better, I should say easier. So here is the seam inside, and I'm just pressing the binding a little bit up to make a start, let's say. Here are of course the two seams, and both you need to take care that of course they are pressed to the inside of these bindings. Okay. What I want to do now, and you'll be tempted to work from behind, but I think the best is to work from the good side of your garment, because let's be honest, if you have just a little bit of difference in the seam allowance and you don't have those 6 millimeters, I'm going to turn this because you'll see better on this pink, then you can adjust to that a little bit when turning. So I'm turning from this side, I'm wrapping over that seam allowance. You don't need to press really hard, but use the steam on your iron better, and I don't know, your fingers, to make a nice... Of course this is a detail that you need to give it a bit of time. Okay, oops. This fabric is so sticky and soft, and I don't know, it's nice that it's soft, but it's not really a pleasure to work with. So this is what I have now. If you are really unsure, you can pin this in the ditch like so, in the seam. Can you see that? Exactly in the seam where you actually you're also going to stitch in the seam. Can you see here? Like so, and you catch a little bit of the binding and a little bit, and exactly in the seam. So this is going to go like this to the sewing machine. I'm not even going to print this all the way around, because I'm going to feel with my fingers that the binding is really nice here against the edge of the seam allowance. And I'm going to stitch in the ditch, or as I said, if you are not sure that you can do that, but it's really not difficult, if you give it a little bit of time, you can really top stitch here very close next to the fold, and that's also going to look nice. So this is what I have with the sewing machine, and after this is done and stitched, of course, a very now it's looking a bit funky, but what is really important after this is going to be stitched in the ditch or top stitched is to trim the rest of the binding, and that's going to give you that nice and flat teardrop. Let's see, I have here, I'm going to make the smaller one because it's faster, of course. I have here the one that is made with the serger. Also this one can get a little bit of steam as sewn. Let's see, don't over press stuff. In a stretchy fabric like this, a little bit of steam is good after being sewn, because it's going to get the stretch a little bit back in the shape. So now I have this, and here the same. The secret is to press the binding over the seam allowance. Also, and again from the right side, I'm just going to trim this, because don't trim yet the ends, leave them a little bit longer, maybe not so long, but longer than you need. And again, because of the serged edge, this is going to make folding really very easy. And depending on your fabric, maybe you need to keep in mind the thread of your serger. Maybe you need to have only 3 needles and not so much thread, or 3 needles, 3 threads, so 1 needle. Okay, and this one is like this. And also this one I'm going to do with the sewing machine. I'm going to press also the bigger one, and then I'm going to show you how to stitch in the ditch. I'm going to show you how to do that with that stitch in the ditch foot. That makes stuff really, really easy to do. So for the stitch in the ditch, I'm going to use the same settings as in the previous step. I'm going to do this with the sewing machine, of course. And I guess you could do also with your cover stitch machine, maybe using 1 needle and making like a chain stitch in the ditch. I did that in the past. It's working good, but you don't have so much control on sewing machine. I think it's a little bit more, I don't know, more finer. What I use on my sewing machine, of course, you can do that with no help, only with your normal presser foot. And I'm going to show on one of the teardrops, but I like to use the stitch in the ditch foot. You know, it's the foot with a little flange here in the middle. And I'm going to use that. It's working really nice. I'm going to show you in a minute. And I noticed that I really don't need to adjust my needle if this flange is going exactly in the seam. I don't need to adjust my needle, and I think that's really nice. So we are going to give that a try. Please keep in mind that I'm using a really bright or I don't know, really not matching thread. I'm using a light thread on such a dark fabric. So you are going, if you are going to, you should use thread that is really matching your fabric, especially in this step is really, really important. So let's see if I can zoom this even more. And I hope you can see this. So I have here one of the teardrops. I think this one is one serged, and I'm going to put that flange exactly in the seam. Can you see that? It's exactly against the seam, and I'm running the fabric against that seam to be sure that my needle is going to come in there. Don't go over the edge, because then you get something that you don't want. I'm going to start a little bit and maybe give it a tug. That's why it's nice if you have that extra in the back here. Let's see, camera is changing the focus. So again, I'm using a thread that is completely not matching with my fabric. My angle is actually also not the best one as I'm sewing from the side, but we are going to see this in a minute. Okay. You can see the stitches now, but when the thing is going to be pressed, I think it's going to look really nice. Again, very important in this step to use some matching thread. And make a test. Maybe you want to move the needle a little bit. We'll see how it's looking on this one. So this is stitch in the ditch. You stitch actually, and as you can see, I did not pin. I'm just feeling with my fingers to wrap and not over too much to start bending the inside of, or that seam allowance inside. I'm just wrapping it and give it just a little bit of tug, and I'm almost at the end. So this is the back with the extra binding that should be trimmed in a minute, because if you don't trim this, you're really not going to have a nice sitting teardrop. This is how it's looking. Here is my stitching line in the ditch. Let's see where I can show it to you. Here. And again, if this was a really matching thread, and after press, this is going to fall in the ditch really nicely, and you are not going to be able to see it. But if I am going to come really close, let's see here. you'll get some pain in your eyes after this. This is really in the ditch of the seam. So this is going to be pressed, and I am going to show you on another one without the stitch in the ditch foot. Let's see what we get there. Also with the crazy thread. I wonder if I should put a normal thread in this. Okay, let's see. I'm going to try to do that on the smaller one. And this one is the sewing machine one. So let's see on this one how it's working. Just putting it like this. Just going to stitch it. Let's see that I'm not stitching some other stuff. Try to start right from the beginning, because you have at the upper part only a 6mm seam allowance, and of course you want to start stitching right. Let's see. I have here on my presser foot some markings, and I'm going to try to follow those, which is not really easy, but it can be done. You really don't need a stitch in the ditch foot. But if you don't have a stitch in the ditch foot and you really are afraid to try to do that without one, you can also top stitch your binding, and it's also going to look fine. You know what, I'm going to show you on that other one how to top stitch. Okay, so we are here trying to do that stitch in the ditch. I'm going to continue to the end, and I'm going to show you how this is looking. So without the stitch in the ditch foot, just taking the time to... Actually, I'm following a marking that is just a hair away from the center line on this presser foot, and I think that's really that's also the line where this is just shaving the needle, let's say. This is how it's looking without the stitch in the ditch foot. It's looking pretty nice. It's really important actually not to catch the binding, because that's something that you really see very easy. So again, when this is going to be pressed, and if you used a really matching thread, you'll not see those stitching lines. And very important from behind to trim this away in order to have the teardrops to lay really flat. For top stitching, I wanted to show you also. So I have here I switched to a darker color to show you how a normal or a good one should look for the bigger keyhole on my final garment. But I want to show you top stitching. Of course, you can do it with a contrasting thread, but you can also do it with a matching thread, because I think you want to have the binding that is showing, not so much the thread. So of course this one is a finished one, but imagine you put your needle just to be, I don't know, maybe a millimeter away or two from the edge. You also again feel with your finger that everything is nice and coming nicely over to the back, and then you are just going to stitch. Again, use a little bit longer stitch, and not like I have here a light color thread on the front, on the back of the garment, but try to use, of course, something that is really matchy and is not going to show. Of course, top stitching is really easy, but I think you should give a try to stitch in the ditch. And for top stitching, just I think I just folded it up. Okay, let's see. I don't know if you can see it. Let's see. Here with black. That's why I said, so ignore the white stitching line from the previous, as I said, this was a finished one. let's see, maybe here you can see the black, and here the longer stitch is the one from top stitching. But you have of course only one row, and because you see this, because this one is black, you almost cannot see it even if it's a top stitch on the binding, and actually it's really nice also because the thread is so matching, you cannot really see. So I have here my messy keyholes. As you can see, these things are really too long. I can make them just a little bit shorter. It's really not necessary to have them so long. Trim some threads away, and then we can take a look. This one is the keyhole that is it was sewn with the sewing machine, and I can feel that because it's a little bit softer on the inside. That's also the benefit of having doing that with the sewing machine. You don't have of course the thread, but as you can see here, this is not sitting flat, and that's also exactly the effect that you'll get here on the front. So what you really want to do first is of course to trim that, and by that I mean the extra of the binding here that is left over after sewing. So I like to trim with bigger scissors. I also have you know, some of those applique scissors. You can also use those, also very nice working, but even with those I advise a lot of attention because you can snip something. As you can see here, really close to the edge, but of course not cutting other stuff. And I like to use my big scissors. I have much more control, where these ones are really big. These ones are the 28 inches. I like to use the 25, but I have this one here. I'm really careful, and because it's a knit fabric, this one is not going to fray of anything, other problems. So this is trimmed, and now I can give it a nice press. Okay, and of course my final position of this is going to be meeting here at the 6mm seam allowance from the edge. So they will have to meet. So this point and this point, if let's say if this is my seam allowance on this side, and it's a 6mm, as you can see, like this, so from the edge to here, and then I have a 6mm, of course you will measure that. I want to have it that is going to meet exactly here, so not wrapping, but these points where the seam allowance is, they need just to come next to each other. And then I can give this a bit of steam, not so much. And then of course you need to keep in mind that this is also going to stretch on your body. So this is going to come really nicely like this. And now is my keyhole done. So at this moment I have serged my shoulder seams, and I added also the clear elastic in the back shoulder seam. And I have here my neckband. I just sew it with a sewing machine to be able to open the seam really nicely. So it's a single layer and it's quartered, so put the center back and the center front together, and then you get the other sides. And I did the same with the neckline as per instructions. So the center back, the center front will be exactly where the big teardrop is meeting here, the 6mm seam allowance, and then put those two together, and then you have the other quarter. Again, as per instructions, keep in mind that the shoulder seam is not the quarter of the neckline. So I have at this moment the neckband prepared, I have the neckline prepared. What I want to do one last step is to cut the extra here at the teardrops. Try to cut it a little bit straight. And then also here. And the last one here. So now the neckline is clean and I can match all these little edges at the 6mm seam allowance. Now you have of course a lot of possibilities that you can assure that these ones they are going to meet at the 6mm seam allowance and not here at the cut edge. I think you should try a few things, what works best for you. What I am going to do, I think I'm just going to turn this to the back. Of course you can see much better now. And to be sure that I am at the 6mm seam allowance, to be honest, I mostly eyeball this. I'm just going to measure and I'm going to make a mark where that would be. This white pencil is going to come out in a moment. I mean that you can see it. Here again. And here again. And when this is done, I can start to see where I need to meet all these edges. Here 6 and here 6. Okay. Maybe you can see now here the mark, this white line. Now mostly I'm sewing this because I need to sew right sides together, the right side of the neckband to the right side of the garment. But I think in this case it's better to sew actually from the inside of the garment, because like that I can really position the edges of the teardrops exactly well on the foot of the machine, on the presser foot, because I need to have it like this. And it's really difficult to pin this because you have almost nothing to pin, as you can see here. So I'm just going to take this to the machine. What you can also do, you can take a thread and needle, and with a few stitches exactly here where I have the needle, you can take a few stitches to be sure that that is going to sit to stay in place. So that's also a possibility. But I think I'm going to let it like this, and I'm going to take it to the sewing machine to see how we are going to sew this together. Okay, let's find the center back. I'm just going to start from there. I'm just going to lower my presser foot, and I'm just going to sew. And from what I know, let's see, I lost my, but I think it was somewhere here. From what I know, this neckband is really not how should I say, you need to stretch it, but not a lot. So I'm just going to meet the quarter points here, because most of the action in this case is happening actually in the front. So here we are safe. I'm just going to stretch the band to meet here the edge of the garment. Usually I'm sewing with the garment against the bed of the machine, but here I really need to see what I'm doing. And again, in this case, it's also very important to have the 6mm seam allowance really even, because that's going to give the edge to wrap your binding around your neckline, and you need to have it even. You can again keep the fabric a little bit taut, a little bit I don't know, don't stretch it, but to build just a little bit of stretch in your straight stitch. Of course, a neckband like this, usually you can put it also under the serger, but because of this action happening here, there is no other way. Okay, so, or at least I don't see another way. Center front, and my big teardrop is going to be my center front. So to have a little bit of reference here, I'm just going to put these two together, like so. You see, it is a little bit fiddly to do this, but if you take your time, you can do it. Okay, now I have my notch somewhere. Here, and of course I did it on the wrong side of my band. It should be here. And now, where is my big teardrop? I know that this is where I want to have my teardrop. Let's put a pin here, and then we can walk this around, stretch it a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to put this like this. These ones to meet in the front. Can you see? Okay, so I'm just going to sew this. And now, as I'm approaching here, I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to sew until this point here where the first keyhole starts or ends, let's say. Yes. And then I'm just going to grab the other one. I'm just going to put it, because I can see my little line, I'm just going to put it against. Let's see. Or those points to meet. And I'm just going to sew. Okay, the next one is the big one. But I have a few steps first to sew. Keep your eye on your 6mm seam allowance. Okay. I have a pin here that I will try to avoid with my needle. Okay, I need to take it out now. And again, I'm going to sew over the first part of the hole. I'm almost there. And now I'm coming with the second part. Okay, let's see if I can put it nicely there. Yes. Okay. And now I'm almost... Okay, I'm going to take this out. And I need to make it to the next one. Of course, I have the benefit of having a knee lift here on my machine, and I can use both hands. And now I am almost at the end of the third keyhole, and I'm going to grab the last piece. And I'm going to put it here. Let's see. You need to check that you don't twist anything. Your keyhole to get twisted or something like that is really easy actually to get those. And I can see that. Okay. And now I'm almost done. Going to put this like so. Give it a little bit of a tug. And this is what I have now. You see the three keyholes, and if I was to turn this, this is the first one, Now I'm going to move the cam, I think, to see it better. This is the second one, the big one. I think it looks really, really nice. And where is the third one? Oops, this is the third one. And I think it worked really nicely. I think that's the key, to sew it from the inside, from the garment side, to see exactly where these points are matching, and sew to the point, stop, put the other one against that line what you just marked in the previous step, and then you'll be sure that you are meeting at the correct step. So I'm going to move the cam and make a little bit of a or I can also go now. So at this step our points are really nicely met here against each other. I hope you can see this. I think it's very, very clear. The next step, of course, is going to be to wrap this over like so, and then again stitch in the ditch, and or top stitch as we did on the previous step on the keyhole. I'm going to top stitch this. Let's see. So I'm just going to wrap it over like I did on the keyholes, just to wrap it and go all the way around. And in this case, as I said, I'm just going to top stitch it, as it is really, of course, much faster, as it requires a little bit lesser effort to do this. And I'm going, of course, to top stitch from the right side. Okay. And the key here is, of course, you could press it first. That's always a good step to do. So I have it here. I'm just going to top stitch. Let's put the zoom here. So just to be fast, I'm just going to top stitch this. Maybe 1 millimeter. I'm going to follow a really small marking on my machine here, and I'm just going to top stitch it with 3 length stitch. What is important here is to keep your wrapping even. Do stretch, because you need to stretch the fabric again back to be straight, as you will have it normally, because now it's a little bit eased in the band. You know, the band was a little bit shorter, so I'm just going to wrap this. I'm going to continue top stitching. If this was a fabric that it was a solid fabric, like let's say, I'll actually take the time and do the stitch in the ditch. But as I noticed in the sample I made, you almost cannot see this the stitching in this print, so I might as well be fast and top stitch everything. As you can see here in the back, the problem with this fabric is that while the front is green and printed, if you really stretch it, you can see the black, the white backside of it, and I don't know if I really like that, but with a little bit of steam I think it's going to look great. So here I'm at the first keyhole, and I have big hopes that it's going to look good. Okay, go slowly, because this is the center focus of your garment. So I'm going to stitch this around, and here at the front you need to be careful, because maybe because of the keyholes you did have a little bit of I don't know, the seam allowance can be a little bit wonkier or something like that, or that wrapping that edge, so maybe you can adjust that with the folding of the binding, make it a little bit smaller, or if you have a really big seam allowance, you can trim a little bit to give you back the 6 millimeters all the way around. So my neckband is done. As you can see here, I used the lighter thread in the bobbin. It's really okay. But this is how it's looking now. I'm just going to give it a press. And of course, also in this case, it's really important to trim the little extra seam allowance that you have here in the back. So I have it here. As you can see, the result is pretty nice. I'm just going to trim a little bit. You really need to trim this. This is so the extra of the neckband. I'm just going to trim it. Take your time. So I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to give it a press and continue with the rest of the shirt. And I'm going to show you the results when everything is done. So this is the shirt. I hope you had a lot of help from this tutorial, and that you saw that it's not so difficult, and even if this is looking a little bit complicated, it's actually really easy. And as you saw, it's only a matter of giving a little bit of care and a little bit of attention to the small little details. And what is really important, to have this ends here meeting together and not overlapping. And you know what, if you cannot get them really matching with each other, overlap them, and maybe in the next one you get the seams really nice to meet at the top here, the binding. But as you've seen, if you are making this and you are sewing like I'm doing from the part from the body side, you have a really good control where all these pieces are meeting with each other. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you'll make your beautiful Yvette dresses. Don't forget to tag me if you are making this pattern using my tutorial. On Instagram I am at Calcedonia Sewing, as my YouTube channel's name is. And also I think Designer Stitch will enjoy very much if you are making this beautiful pattern and you'll tag Designer Stitch on your social media channels. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!